Welcome back to Slow Living. My name is Esther, and in this video I'm going to talk you through the easiest way to sew up this draft stopper. This is a super practical thing to make, and it's a beginner-friendly project as well as being a great scrap busting project. This house used to have carpet, which is why all of the doors have this pretty decent gap underneath them. So I made a bunch of these to stop the cold air from flowing through, and they worked really well. The first thing you want to do is measure how big that gap is underneath your door. So for me, the gap was about over 3 centimeters. So that means I need my door stopper to be maybe a couple of centimeters taller than that, around 5 centimeters. And then also measure the length of your door, obviously. I think mine was about 78 centimeters. I think that's pretty standard, but of course measure your door just in case, and then measure the width of your door. Again, I think this is pretty standard at about 3.5 centimeters, but just in case, measure yours in case it's wider or more narrow, and then go ahead and write up those measurements so that you have them all on paper in front of you. So I'll use my measurements as an example. So obviously you want to use your own so that it fits your door. The longest part of the stopper for me is 80 centimeters. That's the length of my whole door. And then the gap underneath my door was around 3 centimeters. So I'm going to add a couple of centimeters to that and make it 5 centimeters. And I'm going to take that measurement and multiply it by 4 to get the whole width of the other side of this rectangle. So for me, that's 20 centimeters. So to recap, get the length of your door for the long side of the rectangle, and then take the measurement of the gap that's under your door, add a few centimeters to that, and then multiply that by 4 to get the other side of the rectangle. The sewing part is super easy. We're just going to fold the sides up like this and then sew them. So that means we have to add some seam allowance. The width of my door was 3 centimeters, so I'm going to halve that, which is 1.5 centimeters, and that's going to be my seam allowance. If you were watching closely, you'll see that the width of my door is actually a bit over 3 centimeters, more like 3.5. So this measurement doesn't have to be exact. It just means that the door stopper is going to sit quite snugly against both sides of the door, which is kind of what you want. You'll need seam allowance around the entire rectangle. So to keep things simple, I recommend using the same seam allowance around the whole thing. I'll be using this felted wool fabric from my stash, so it's nice and thick and it also won't fray. So if you're using a fabric that's going to fray, I recommend using a serger or a zigzag stitch to go all around the outside of the rectangle to stop it from fraying. Of course, you'll have to cut out the rectangle first. So here I am just marking it with chalk and a measuring tape and a ruler to get the measurements of that rectangle and then cutting it out. Once it's cut out, you can mark the midpoint of the short side of the rectangle because we're going to fold up both sides to meet in the middle so that it looks like this. My fabric doesn't have a right side and a wrong side, so if yours does, make sure you sew with your right sides together. My seam allowance was 1.5 centimeters, so that's how much I'm going to sew out from the edge. So just be aware if your seam allowance is different to make sure that you keep that on this short edge as well. Once the short edges are sewn, you should flip it out the right way and it should look like this. At this point, it's a good idea just to double check your measurements with your door before you go any further. If you're happy with the measurements, you can go ahead and sew down these 2 center parts. The only thing is that you have to leave a gap for both sides so that you can stuff it with whatever filling you're going to use. I do recommend leaving that gap in the middle of the stopper to make it as easy as possible to get all the stuffing or filling into both ends. You can use pretty much anything to stuff on the inside. You do want it to be fairly light though, not super heavy. So I've got all these fabric scraps that I'm going to stuff in there, which is a great way to upcycle stuff that would otherwise go to landfill. The stuffing process took longer than I thought, but it's really up to you whether you'd like to fill it lightly or if you wanted it to be quite tightly stuffed. I wanted mine to be quite rigid, and so I really tried to stuff as much as I could into there. I also found using this mini hockey stick to really stuff things in was very helpful. So use whatever you can to get the job done. Once it was stuffed, this is what mine looked like. It can be a little bit tricky to get that middle section where it's not closed to stuff that properly, but do your best. And then the last thing to do is to close up those 2 holes. Once you've sewn them shut, it should look like this, and it's ready to pop on the bottom of the door. I hope you found this video helpful, and I will see you in another one soon.